Welcome to the High Agency Podcast with your host, Noah Ravoy. To rebuild the West, we must first rebuild ourselves. But right now we live in history's most effeminate society. Masculinity has been undermined for more than 100 years, as men themselves have lost both their authority to make decisions in society, as well as their agency to make personal decisions in their own lives. But this isn't where the story ends. The Renaissance of Man is a term that Will Spencer, my guest tonight, coined to describe the global awakening that's taking place. As men around the world discover a need to renew masculinity for an obviously failing age. Will also hosts a podcast where he talks about trailblazers in this decentralized movement and offers coaching services for men to help them become active participants in it as well. Welcome, Will.
Thanks, Noah. It's nice to meet you. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. We share a lot of the same goals in common, helping men to become men. I have some friends and they like to say males and men because not all males become men. But it's interesting that in society, we've had that in the past. There were times when, even though we had a much more masculine society, there was a lot of qualifications to become a man. You had to prove yourself into manhood. And there were always men that didn't make it. And society actually found ways to help those men to become useful. The reason is today you're a man. Why? Because you turned 18. Now you're a man.
Yeah.
You can get drunk now. That makes you a man.
Hey, you can vote.
Depending on what state you're in, of course. Yeah. But it used to be in society that you had to prove you're a man to get the right to vote, to get the right to get married even. There were a lot of qualifications around that. And some men some males, some young men were unable to prove that they could live in society. And they ended up essentially ending up outside of society, but still in a useful position to society. Today, if you don't become a man and no one's helping you, it appears, and no one is telling you where that demarcation is, you just end up lost somewhere between 18 and old.
Right.
You're stuck between 18 and old.
And it's
what's
actually
that like for men today?
Well, I can tell you what that was like because that was me.
Yeah.
That was me. I was wandering. I was aimless. I had no sense of self. I had no, as you say, agency. By the way, I listened to your 21 convention talk. Excellent talk. And you covered a lot of topics that I think men today need to hear. I love the way that you really put a pin on this notion of individual agency, which is something different than free will. Free will and the ability to choose freely between options is its own thing, but agency is the ability to actually follow through on it and to proceed forward with intention. And I think that's such an important idea that you crystallized really well. And I enjoyed listening to that talk in the socio-cultural context for that as well. So I went through a phase of my life for many years where I didn't have agency. And in fact, I didn't actually even know that I could have agency. I had the feminist mind virus, which I think I was probably infected with sometime in childhood. And then living in San Francisco, you're just breathing it in all the time, right? And so I thought that me having agency was bad or wrong or patriarchal or toxic on a conscious level. And just on a subconscious level, I felt so much resistance towards claiming that. Just like, oh my gosh, like, can I actually, no, I can't touch that. Like that, I can't have that. Like grasping the sword and the stone. I think there's some mythological resonance to that idea of, drawing the sword from oneself, which probably wounds the self in some way, and you pull it out and you claim it for your own strength. It's like, wow, can I actually like grab hold of this thing and pull it out of the stone and claim it for use in my own life? Without that, men are useless, weak, dangerous, nice guys, all of these things. And that was me for many years until I made some concrete changes in my life and entered the world of men, I guess you might say. And through a multi-year process, I was able to claim that agency for myself and make significant changes.
Yeah, you mentioned the wound you get as you develop agency. As you pull that sword from the stone. And it really can be very painful to recognize that I am where I am because of a set of decisions that I made. If I say that about myself, I will get some pushback. When I say to a person, And they say, my life isn't where I want. And I'm like, well, you've been making a set of decisions that got you there. Let's see how we can change those decision-making patterns and get you into a better place. Honest people, they'll feel the pain, they'll come around to it, and they'll accept that. But a lot of people, you say it on Twitter, and you might as well have just said you were best friends with Hitler. Like, people will absolutely hate everything you say after that, because it's so painful for them to accept that where they are can't be blamed on somebody else. Now, absolutely, if you're a young teenager or a child and you're living at home with your parents, probably nobody that age is listening here. According to YouTube guidelines, you're not allowed to. Stop looking. You're not allowed to grow up. Grow up when you're 18. The very moment you turn 18, watch all my videos, and then you can grow up.
Boom, magic.
Yeah, it's boom, you're growing up. But no, it's you when you take that kind of personal responsibility, it also means that you are now cognizant that all of your life you've been screwing up. Mm-hmm. And you got to admit that is part of what you have to admit. If you're 18 and I explain some of these things to people, they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Okay, where do I sign up? What do I do? Because at 18, you have enough humility to say, I haven't been screwing up long enough that I probably should have even known better yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you try that with a guy who's 38, 20 years later, and now it's really difficult to admit that, hey, I could have been 20 years farther ahead if I'd known this 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And some people get stuck in that stage of being humiliated and can't move out of it. And other men, they go, yeah, this also means I have the power to change from here on.
Mm-hmm.
You basically become a different man after that.
Well, you have to. And this is the process. You mentioned that societies in the past had pathways for boys to become men, and that was called initiation. This was, in harsher times, you had the Spartans, and I have a Spartan. It's on this side, Spartan helmet back here. They would take the boys, and this is not unusual in world cultures prior to the modern era. Boys would be sent on a vision quest of some sort into the wilderness. Maybe they have to go kill something, or maybe they have to endure some sort of scarification ritual, or through some incredibly difficult physical trial. And if they succeed, that's the entryway, the initiation to becoming a man. If you succeeded, that means you probably survived. And if you didn't succeed, you died, and you don't get to become a man of the tribe anyway. So the problem is kind of solved. And so that's very harsh by what we might consider modern standards, but it's actually very effective if you need to make sure that all the men in your tribe are actually men, and that there are no boys who snuck through, because a boy is not going to survive the trial of a man. And if he does, congratulations, you get the start of assuming the responsibilities of the tribe. So now we don't have those male initiation rituals anymore. And so you experience boys growing up without them, and they become adult males at this point, we'll say, and then they get the chance through you or through me or through coaching or however to claim that responsibility and experience an initiation. And the sad fact is that many males are simply not up to it. But the men who have this desire and drive to grow into full masculinity will claim that sword. Maybe they'll do it slowly, maybe they'll do it haltingly, but they'll still do it, because there's something inside them that wants to live, and they recognize that their fundamental survival, which I wouldn't describe as different from thriving. Normally we say, oh, there's base level survival and then there's thriving. Thriving is actual survival. You can think of it in terms of like bear level survival, but nowadays with so much prosperity around everywhere, with true abundance we've achieved in the human species, we can look at survival and thriving as being much more closely aligned. And so many men are content with the bare minimum of just existence, let's say, that they don't really feel the need to claim survival or claim thriving, but only by claiming your full masculinity and by passing through the stages of initiation as a man whenever they're presented to you, can you really thrive? And that's quite scary to some men, because like you say, it does require assuming a whole lot of responsibility, both for the past and the present and the future. And it's just easier to remain a boy in some way psychologically in the mind and not say, oh, I'm just not gonna look at that. I'm just gonna be over here with my Netflix and porn and
it
junk.
never happened. I didn't see it.
That's right. That's right.
You bring up a really important point, is that these initiations and this entire process, this didn't happen individually. This wasn't something that you did by yourself on your own. Now, the test might be on your own.
Yeah.
Because often men, they face tests on their own, but they face them at the or under the structure, at the behest of their community. And so we can't become a man in a vacuum, because we have nothing to test ourselves against, and we don't have the men sharpen each other. When men are together, they become more masculine, and we don't have that if we're all alone in a vacuum. People will come to men like us as coaches and mentors, and even then we say that is not enough. You need to go out and find your tribe.
Yep,
we'll help you. We'll guide you through that process, but you got to go find your tribe, because after you've become a man, you need to still be part of a tribe. With the ancient Germanic traditions, you actually had to get picked by a community. A community had to adopt you into it as a man. Okay, you've graduated from childhood. You've passed the physical tests. You now qualify. We're going to hire you on, so to speak, as a man. You're now a man in our tribe. In the manorial system that went up until the end of the Middle Ages, basically, some parts of Europe till the 1700s, the lord of the manor had to accept you into the manor, or you would never have the stable situation to have a wife, which means you weren't in the gene pool after that. And so that required men to not just say they were a man. You can't, I'm a man, I look like a man, and I can do man stuff.
Right.
You actually had to convince other men that you were a man. And that's, we talk about the cardinal virtues of masculinity. One of them is honor. And honor is that reputation that you have amongst other men. And it's really something that every male institute and agency has either disappeared, become co-ed, or been completely corrupted in the last 100 years. And rebuilding these male groups, these exclusively male groups, is extremely important to this renaissance of man.
It's crucial. It's crucial. You said something really interesting. You said a bunch of things that are really interesting, but you talked about basically the end of your genetic line, and in the manorial system, like if you weren't picked for the team, you die. You die a genetic death. And when you said that, I was thinking that now we have, and Jordan Peterson got in trouble for saying this because people don't want to listen to what the guy ever says. He talked about enforced monogamy, which is not that we're forcing people to get married. It's that monogamy is the enforced standard across our society. So we don't have polygamy. So there's enough reproductive opportunities to go around now. And I wonder if in some sense, not that I think we should change it necessarily, but I wonder if some sense that's allowed men to grow a little bit lazy and complacent, where they don't really have to compete to reproduce like they would have for basically all of human history up until this, well, more or less this point.
It's actually really up until about the Second World War that men were still competing heavily, and the loss of a large number of men meant that the men who were left were able to get. And there was two things. There was the loss of a large number of men, and then there was a large number of women who couldn't get married during the war period, who all wanted to get married at the same time, competing for those last men. So basically, any man could find a woman. Right. Nowadays, I kind of think that society has strayed away from that enforced monogamy. What you really have now is you got the top 5-10% of men get all the women. And the bottom 90% of men, they get the leftovers, the women that are too fat for the top 10%, too ugly, too many children, or whatever it happens to be. And they end up filtering down into the bottom 80-90% of men. And that is, that's kind of returning a little bit to the old system and causing a destabilization. One of the advantages of enforced monogamy under the manorial system, for example, is that about a third of men never reproduced, even under that system. Now, instead of saying only the top percent get to reproduce, which destabilizes society, it could be eugenic, except it destabilizes society. What we said was almost everyone except for the very bottom reproduces.
Right.
And so, but we had places for those men to go. We didn't leave them out. They could go and join the church. They could become monks. Some men, it's not due to lack of ability. They just don't want to get married. They don't want to have kids.
Right.
They don't want to have that kind of a life. And there are women like that too. They'd end up in nunneries. And, with men, it's about a third of men historically never reproduced. And with women, it's about 20%. Women are more likely to want children than men are. And some guys would go off and discover the world. They get in a leaky boat and go sail around the world and come back laden with treasure or dead. And so, which you're more likely to come back, well, you're more likely to die along the way than you were to come back with treasure. But they felt that was an okay sacrifice for the kind of life they wanted to live. Nowadays, if you're not in that real top percentage, or you're part of a traditional community which still has enforced monogamy, you end up being basically an incel. Some men will dress it up by saying they're going MGTOW, and no, women went one way and you were left alone. Yeah. There are some men who are MGTOW that they've actually chosen that, but a lot of men, that was a de facto state because the only women that are left available to them are not interesting. Right. And so that is to a large extent becoming a destabilizing factor in society. And we see any society that has a large number of young men who have nothing to do and no women to impress, you end up with violence. And so we see increase in violence in the last couple of years, most of it centered around political violence. And if you look at an Antifa list of who's been arrested at a riot, you look at that and you say, look, it's a whole load of undateable people. These are people who aren't going to get married and have kids. And so we have this society. Not only do we have an extremely effeminate society on average, a society that doesn't respect men and doesn't help young boys become men. We have a society that offers no honorable place for men who don't fit into traditional relationships to go. There's nothing for them to do. And this is a huge problem. I think for a lot of young men, they're probably better off for a while not thinking about dating and focusing on self-improvement. And, at least until they're at a point where the kind of women they can attract are worth marrying. But none of that is really, if you're a young man and you don't want to date, then, well, you must be gay, right? Right. So there's always going to be, all of your motives will have something impugned onto your motives. And for a lot of men, they need someone they can talk this through with, and they don't have fathers, they don't have community leaders, and they're not part of a community, and they have no one to talk these stresses that they're under with.
Right. And this gets back to the initiation piece, because when you were initiated as a man, someone came for you. Your father, the men of the community, whatever, they came for you. They said, we assume responsibility for these boys. The boys are attached to their mothers, through the first 7 to 12 years of their life, when puberty begins to come on, because, it's generational at this point. We don't have, blurred generations. You have very distinct generations in tribal life. So the boys are all very attached to their mothers. But then the time comes to separate them from their mothers. And the men of the tribe come and say, I take responsibility for you. I claim you from your mother and I bring you into the world of men. That doesn't happen anymore. That doesn't happen for us. That didn't happen for our fathers. That probably didn't happen for our grandfathers. Maybe in some sense for some of us, our great grandfathers. But no one's taking responsibility. No men are taking responsibility for the generation that follows them. No one took responsibility for me. No one came for me. I came for myself over and over and over again. And thank God for that. Thank God for that. And I've been fortunate to come for other men, but it's not the same as a father coming for his son. And when we don't have that, when that generational chain gets broken, which probably got broken sometime around the Industrial Revolution, when fathers were separated from their sons, that would be the last link in the chain, really, I would say, because initiation as a thing has not really been huge in the West in the way that I'm talking about it. But certainly sons growing up under the auspices of their fathers in the fields, in the blacksmith shop, the forge, or wherever, growing up close to their fathers, they learn that lesson. The father takes responsibility for the son and plays that out day after day after day for years. And the son learns effective male behavior from watching his father. And then when fathers are taken out and sent into factories that the boys can't go to, then you have that chain gets broken. No one comes for the boys anymore. They remain in the world of the mother, or they go to public schooling, which is primarily run by women, And so, voila, 140 years later, here we are. But that lack of claiming, I think, is a deep and painful. I don't like this word wound because it's been claimed. It's a feminized word, unfortunately, as much of the language around inner healing is. And I think it turns a lot of men off to the nobility of the work. And so I'm trying to come up with new words and new language to describe these concepts in ways that hasn't been feminized. But for right now, I'll go with the word wound, and we'll just understand it as not this, feminized kind of thing, but an actual felt emotional pain in the body of some opportunity that was missed. Like there was something that was supposed to be done for me in childhood that my genes and my psychology is telling me should have happened. It didn't happen. And it's like a pebble in my shoe of my mind. My brain has feet now. But so it's like there's something that's wrong, and that continues on. And I think men feel it and they react to it, cope with it, respond to it in all different ways. And what I think is really exciting about this particular moment in time is that this has been going on for 100 or so years. And now collectively, and this is the nature of the Renaissance of men, collectively, all these men are waking up to these things that have been wrong and are doing something about it. And they're saying, you know what? No one's coming for us. Like that's the popular manosphere refrain. That's Marcus Aurelius Stoicism. No one is coming for you. You have to come for yourself. And while that's true, yes, it is true. No one's coming for you. We're also coming for each other, which is incredibly exciting to me, that men have just kind of said, okay, you know what? We're going to break from this past, this feminized past that we've all been living in, and we're going to start defining and redefining our own rules. And you know what? Screw off feminized culture. We're going to do it without you. Do something about it. Which that's the best part. It's like, do something about it. Try and stop us from initiating each other. Try and stop us from going to the gym. All right, you want to shut down the gym? I'll work out in my living room. I moved into this apartment just before lockdown hit. I was living overseas. I moved into this apartment with no furniture. I had a bed. Thank God I had a frame for the bed. I had a little tiny stand for like a bed stand to put my alarm clock on. And that was it. And I lived in this place for 4 or 5 months with no furniture. And you know what? While I was in here, I lost 40 pounds. I turned it into my gym. No gym? Fine. Try and stop me from tracking my calories. Try and stop me from losing weight. Try and stop me from reading print books. You can't stop it. And that's what's really exciting. And so we're just doing this on our own, and like, hey, deplatform whatever. You can't stop us from connecting with other men like your tribe, like you say. So what I say is this Renaissance of men is a process that has been initiated, a historical process that has been initiated, that's been going on for 40 years, and that is just now beginning to develop really, really incredible momentum that we're going to be able to do very shortly, if not already, do incredible things with. And it's going to cause a great hue and cry and the giant shit fest, and it's going to be absolutely wonderful and glorious.
Yeah, you mentioned something earlier where it was really important, is that someone came for you and said, I'm going to take responsibility for you. And it was interesting. It's a two-way street. When you were initiated, it wasn't that someone just tapped you on the shoulder and said, okay, you're a man now.
Right.
Act like one, stand up straight, act like one. No, it was that you actually took an oath to your group.
Yep.
So and this is why part of the reason why European culture was very, very unique is that this oath wasn't always to your family group either. Mm-hmm. You might be initiated into a group in which you didn't have family members or very many. And this was actually encouraged during the manorial period, that you would, grow up in one area and then you'd move to another to get married. And this helped to prevent gross intermarriage, like very close intermarriage over time, and actually led to a real flowering of European culture, because if all of your relatives were in all the communities around you, your community couldn't war on the next community over, because it doesn't matter where we go, there's some relative of mine there. We can't fight with them.
Right. Let's work it out.
And your bonds would be in a network, in a mesh effect, instead of being just to your tribe in a very up and down hierarchy. And this led to, the real creation of European nations and peace within the nations. We worry about war between nations. We used to have to worry about war with literally the neighbors, a 50-year feud with the neighbors. And in places that didn't have the manorial system, like Italy, we had that feud culture. So they would be constantly killing each other over time. Southern Europe didn't have the manorial system, so they often kept that feud culture, and it did hold them back in their cultural development for a long time during that period. But one of the things that is interesting, I'm starting to see now, is groups of men actually forming up into tribes and saying, like, we're going to become blood brothers. We're going to actually take an oath that we're going to look out for each other, because we don't see the effeminate system being very stable over the next 20, 30 years, but we want to raise kids. Yeah. What happens if something, I mean, anything that's feminine is not going to be stable. That's the nature of it.
Yeah.
The stability comes from the masculine boundaries around the feminine. And we do need both. We need the instability and the stability. You need a balance between the two. But it's gone so far, the system has gone so far that it's become unstable. And what they're saying is, I can buy insurance. The insurance company can decide they don't like to do business with me anymore because I said some naughty things. So they're gonna cut me off. My bank could cut me off. Who knows what could happen? COVID could just shut down our ability to live, period. You know, not COVID, but the restrictions. Right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to band together with a group of my brothers. We're going to swear an oath of blood brothers to each other, and we're going to take care of each other. And each other's wives and each other's children. And it doesn't matter what happens, we're going to stick together. And I'm starting to see that forming again. And that's very close to the roots of how we used to do things back when we had, you were initiated not just into manhood, you were initiated as a man into a tribe. And that tribe had its own specific culture and rules. And I think this is going to happen again. And that is, you know, as we evolve this renaissance of man, we're going to take the best of our traditional ideas and reuse them again.
That is exactly the spirit. And you were talking about the manorial system versus the feudal system. Italy was in a feudal system prior to the Renaissance, and it was the Italian Renaissance. And it was out of that feudal system and the natural competitiveness that came as a result of it that the Renaissance was able to flower as the philosophers and musicians discovered the works of ancient Rome and Greece. And so there became this kind of competition and patronage that led to one feudal state competing with another feudal state to get the most philosophers. And then boom, they kind of rediscovered all this information, and also some ancient occult texts, and also the Medici family. And the Renaissance exploded out of that, and it sort of crashed as a wave through all of Europe, first in Italy, then into France as well. Those were the primary staging grounds for it, and then it spread throughout Europe. And in the same way, I don't think we're going into a feudal state now, but we're certainly in a form of dark ages, a sort of hyper competitiveness in the kind of world that we're in. And I think the oath aspect is really important, because when you pledge an oath to something, you acknowledge that you give your life in service of something higher than yourself. And that is something that I think that is definitely something that men need. I think it's probably something that women need as well, but I would need to think harder about that. Certainly it's something that men need. And to give a sense that we live in this hyper individualized culture that's all about me, my needs, my expression, you know, my fulfillment. And there's nothing fundamentally wrong with that. However, it can go too far. And then where it becomes just about you and not about you in service of something beyond yourself, then it just kind of becomes like the Ouroboros. It's the snake that starts devouring its own tail, and there's really no end to it. And it's just a constant spiral, you know, either up or down, I suppose, in a way of wanting more and then collapsing on oneself. But when you give yourself in service to something higher than yourself, whatever it is, it can be your team, it can be your tribe, it can be your God, it can be, you know, some set of philosophical ideals. When you pledge yourself to something higher, suddenly you have a way to orient your efforts in a linear forward moving direction, and the spiral, you know, sort of ceases in a very powerful way. And so when we're talking about this renewal, this rebirth of masculinity, these oaths are very, very powerful. Like, well, what am I giving my life in service of? What am I going to do with this life that I've been given beyond my own individual fulfillment? And so this renaissance, the renaissance of men, is about in service of ideals that are higher than ourselves, and rediscovering, as you say, this best of masculinity that we have lost sight of. Our ahistorical era cuts us off from a deep knowledge of history, because if we were to deeply know history, we would find many things about our modern moment that are frankly bullshit. And but we don't get to know any of that. We get, oh, look at the flashy lights and look at the social media and swipe on the screen. It's like when you actually encounter history by reading an actual history book that was written before the 1960s, you begin to see lots of themes that are very, very familiar. And at the same time, you recognize the illness of modern society, but you can also look into the past, particularly about masculinity, and draw out the things that have been taken from us, that we've been deprived access to, and then we can put them into ourselves. And again, that's why I have, which way do I turn? This way. That's why I have this Spartan helmet to remind me of that. You know, I see it every day. And that's just one example of the I guess you might say artifacts of masculinity that I have around my apartment that come from various cultures, from my travels and from various eras, and the books I have on my shelf remind me that there's so much more to the histories that has led up to my existence beyond this bare moment. And I think men are feeling that. They're beginning to wake up as they open their eyes. They discover red pill-esque material, whether it be Rollo Tomassi or this is also why I like what Jack Donovan writes about in The Way of Men in his whole series of books, is that he grounds his, we'll say, worldview building in history, in cited sources, in this knowledge that, okay, no, we're not reinventing it for the first time. I used to use that word, you know, we're reinventing masculinity. I didn't mean anything by it. I meant that we're taking the best of the past and the present and we're putting into this new thing. But I've since learned that the feminism and the new males use this term reinvent masculinity in a very negative connotation, like it's broken in the past and we build this new version. So I've stopped using it in that way. I still believe there's application of the sense that there are things that we've learned about being men in this modern world that we can't just throw out. Like we're not going back to the 1500s. So, you know, we're still going to live, you know, ideally with modern technology, you know, that makes some aspects of manual labor easier, right? And we don't want to go back to an era where, you know, we're pulling oxen. Maybe we do. You know, I don't see that happening, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, the community that uses technology, modern technology appropriately, will always outcompete the community that doesn't.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean that it's the social change that's been the biggest problem, not the technology. Now, some of the social change has been made possible due to technology.
Yep.
So there is a connection between them.
Mm-hmm.
The so-called social innovations of the last 100 years have been basically based on taking everything we know that works, throwing it out the window, and doing the exact opposite, and trying to see how that works. And then, yeah, and then we're born in the middle of this, and we're going, none of this works, none of it works. Okay, what are we going to do? And it's like you said, it's silly to start inventing it from the beginning. Someone asked an interesting question about the historic consequences of taking a blood oath. I definitely think that if you're interested in that, you should Google and read a little bit about it. But generally, when you would take a blood oath, the reason is because even historically, we recognize that, we would talk about our blood relations, our blood relatives, and those are the people that are related to us through blood. The blood was an important. They didn't understand about DNA and genetics, but they understood that somehow in there was something that marked that you were from that family. And when you take a blood oath, you're essentially taking an oath on your ancestors and all of your future children that you will do something. So when you took a blood oath with a group of men, it was that I will follow the rules of this group. And that usually meant that you had to be loyal to the group. Most of the groups had rules against lying, and all of the basic things that we recognize in culture as being wrong: lying, stealing, cheating, murdering in-group members, although sometimes murdering out-group members was okay and stealing from them was okay. But, you would follow the rules of the group, but it was a kind of insurance. So there was no, and there may very soon not be, any social welfare programs back then. And so if you were a man and you were injured in your job, let's say you were part of a carpenter's guild. And these guilds often function very much like the old specialized tribes would. If you were part of a guild, you would take an oath to the guild that you would follow whatever the rules were, but you also were looked after. You would never go hungry. You could show up at a guild house and get work. And so basically it meant that we'd take care of each other. And if you broke the rules of the group, you were out of the group, and there was some penalty. In the warrior cults, usually that meant you were dead. They would kill you. And they took it really serious. The less tolerant your group, the better the quality of people that will join, because they're going to take it real seriously before they take that oath. And I think that's something people taking these types of blood oaths need to think about today, is take it really serious. You know, it's people even get married today not taking it too seriously or thinking it's a lifelong commitment. Basically a blood oath, think of it like a marriage, but with marriage to that group or community. You're now part of it forever, just like they were family. But yeah, we have a lot of social structures and good ideas from the past that we can apply today, but we have to apply them to our situation. We can't apply them to our ancestors' situation. A good example of that is how Europe was reconquered after the Muslim invasions. It was actually done mostly, especially in the Iberian Peninsula where I live, it was done with artificial communities that were created. So a lord would be given a responsibility for a city, and he would estimate he needs, say, 50,000 men to hold that city. And what he would do is he would go north back into the Christian areas and he would recruit 50,000 men. They may or may not know each other. They may be from completely different languages and cultures of Europe. And it would honestly be the unlanded peasants. It would be the bottom of the barrel, so to speak. And they would all be brought at his expense down to that place. And they would work together as a community of warriors. There was usually no women. It was a community of warriors. And they would work together to till the land, to protect the area, and to hold that part of the frontier. And today, 1,000 years later, or roughly that much later in a lot of these places, the descendants of those people are the local community that lives in those towns. And so those artificial communities became organic over time. Once it was safe enough, they brought their wives, they brought women, they recruited women from Europe as well that didn't have any wealth or were from poor families. They would come down there and they would marry the men there. So we're starting now to see the recreation of small private communities that are on the frontier, so to speak. But now the frontier is everywhere. Everywhere is the frontier. And so men are starting to see the need to rebuild community, even not just in the online sense, but in the physical sense, to get together, at least living near enough to each other that they can be face to face on a regular basis. And we're starting to see a restoration of that understanding that we need each other and we need society again. And this is a natural consequence of the weakening of the effeminate society, is that we're going to create a masculine society to replace it. And that really, I see that being a big part of the Renaissance, or as I like to say, rebuild or restoration of the West. And the restoration of the West through the restoration of men. Once the men are restored, then we restore the West and restore culture.
Yeah, I think, I mean, they're the same process. It's just a different way of looking at it. I mean, the Renaissance of men, I think of it in terms of, because there's so many different male leaders out there in the world right now that are leading in terms of fitness or blogging or, video or podcasts. And I don't know that at the moment, and there are other men's retreat organizations like the Mankind Project and Sacred Sons and, all doing all different things all over the world. And I don't know that right now these separate male groups and leaders conceive of themselves as a single thing. And so the Renaissance of men is meant to say, no, this is a single thing that has 40 years of history and momentum behind it, in the same way of the Italian Renaissance, so that all the men that are doing all their different things can look at each other and say, hey, you're doing it differently than me, but we're all kind of doing the same thing. And ultimately, the end goal will be to restore some version of the West, probably not ancient Greece style West, but certainly drawing on the lessons of recent history as well, and a renewed version of the West, let's say, because I don't think that the West is actually alive right now. I think, and I've talked about this on one of my recent podcasts, I think that I call it the anti-spirit. I can give it more colorful names, more religious-based names, but I'll call it the anti-spirit that actually that began a couple 300, 400 years ago, something like that. It ate the West first. It ate America first. And right now this thing is wearing America's skin, is wearing the West's skin. And so it's marching around the world, and I've been to many of these countries, and it's consuming the world's resources, the world's people, it's consuming people's dignity. And it wears an American flag or on its chest and says, "Oh no, this is America." And so some people look at America and say America is evil. It's like, no, no, no. You understand, something ate America, and now it's wearing America's skin. The actual nature of this country is about to be and is being reclaimed slowly in small breakaway communities, as you say. And that's really difficult for some people to take because they have this ingrained hatred of their countries, and also in Europe as well. There's a lot of self-hatred in Europe as well as in the Commonwealth countries. So basically all countries of European descent, they've learned a sort of self-hatred because they've been propagandized to believe that the bad behavior of their government is somehow reflective of their culture as a whole. And they can't draw that distinction and say the government, these governments do not represent the best traditions that come to us out of history. In fact, quite the opposite, especially when it comes to rational debate. There's a lot of talk about the science and all this crap. And it's like, okay, look, if you're so confident, let's have a public debate on television for 1 hour where each party gets 15 minutes uncensored, no moderator. You get 15 minutes to state your case and then 15 minutes and then a rebuttal, and put it on TV, broadcast it free to all the world. And let's see who's actually got the evidence. You want to talk about the science or about whatever subject? You want to talk about philosophy? You want to talk about sociology? Let's do that. Let's actually let the people decide in the sunlight. That is one of the best traditions of the West. That tradition does not exist anymore. We have propaganda fed to us through every possible channel. We have men and women, of course, who are being deplatformed and censored. And as you say, they get their insurance or their bank accounts canceled for saying the wrong thing. It's like, well, I usually say censorship is the tool of cowards. If you have to censor somebody, if you have to censor them and prevent them from speaking, that doesn't actually say anything about them. That says something about you, the censoring agency, that you're actually afraid rather than confronting in the sunlight. And so, this idea of open, rational debate, Socratic dialogue, these are the best traditions of the West, one of them, and we don't have them anymore. But there are communities of men online that are seeking to bring them back. And there's so much exciting possibility with all the information that's available to us on the internet, with books for all of history. Like, how much data is being produced? More data in all of human history is produced every year than some crazy number like that. And we can do a lot with that. And so I'm actually pretty bullish about the prospects, even though if you were to look around, it would seem quite grim. I'm actually pretty bullish about the prospects because of men like us and the men watching and the men that we know that are not going to quit with this. This is a one-way mission. And so that's
we're just getting started.
This literally just getting started.
This really is, society is just hitting the bottom, and that's the bounce time. And we're just getting started, getting ready to fix it. One of my really important goals is actually using things like my program, how to reprogram your life, to teach men agency. I also teach women agency, but the focus is on teaching men, and to teach them how to develop their own agency so they can wade through all of that massive amount of information that's being produced today, and they can tell the difference between lies and the truth. And this is part of the problem. Is we haven't just been undermined as men or undermined a culture. We have been undermined in our ability to develop agency. Part of the initiation process was to discern whether you could survive in reality. Who can survive in reality? It is those who have a grasp of reality, those who can tell the difference between reality and the illusions. If you can't tell the difference, if you think you can live in a fantasy, you won't survive the challenges of manhood. And so it was a way to weed out those who were living in a dream world. There is a saying that women can kind of live in a dream world until they get pregnant, and then all of a sudden they get snapped into reality. But for a lot of men, we don't have that biological reality where all of a sudden a human is growing inside of us and we got to get ourselves together.
That's true.
Yeah, we don't have that. That's why we had to have there's very few initiation rites for women. Mostly it's like, okay, you've hit puberty. Let's get you married.
Right. There's a biological marker. This gets to the notion of the blood oath. And you talked about it from I suppose a genetic standpoint. I'm thinking about it more of a symbolic standpoint, where when you swear a blood oath, let's say you cut your hand and you bleed out of your hand, you have just committed an act that cannot be uncommitted. You could say, oh, I swear an oath to you or whatever. It's like, well, there's something when you actually bleed over something, when you actually give something, experience some pain, give something of yourself to make it real, that creates a feeling of integrity and accountability that exists in a more powerful way than you were to just put your hand over your heart or something like that. And in the same way, when a woman bleeds for the first time, that's an unrecrossable bridge. You don't recross the bridge of puberty, for a woman, because it's very, very clear for the rest of your life. Well, not for the rest of your life, but for the next 30 or 40 years, this is how it's going to be. And so this blood oath, I think in some ways, as we're talking about it, mirrors what happens with women, in this giving their lives to something. What are you giving your life to? Hopefully you're giving it to raising this generation. But for men, what are you giving your life to? You're also swearing a blood oath. So there's interesting parallels with blood there.
Absolutely. No, blood was always considered a sacred substance throughout history. And it's because of that. And it also represents the ultimate sacrifice, because you have very little of it. And to give your blood on behalf of an oath is to basically say, like, I will bleed for this oath. And whatever I've sworn to, I swear it on my blood, which means I'll give the rest of my blood up if necessary to follow through on this oath. And so oftentimes that was really a lot of the spirit of it, was to say, I will die for the things I believe in. Nowadays, most people don't actually believe in anything. They literally, they look around, they go, what does everybody else believe? Okay, that's what I believe too.
Yeah. What did my phone tell me to believe today?
Yeah, what did my phone tell me? What did the news tell me? This is actually the society's big complaint. What are young men doing? Young men aren't watching TV like they should be. How are they going to know what they should believe? We got to get some fact checkers out there to make sure these young men aren't telling each other any facts that we don't agree with.
Oh, yeah.
They're fact checkers. They're not lie discoverers. They're out checking facts and getting rid of them.
Well, I mean, they're like facts. Facts are nothing. There are trillions of facts in this room alone, right? Truth is a very different thing from facts. You assemble truth out of a portrait of facts. And so if you have this truth as the high level concept up here, it is supported by thousands and thousands of facts, right? And so this truth, just because this one fact, for example, might not be completely true, there's a billion others that are supporting this truth. And we don't have this. We don't have truth creation. We have image creation that has just enough, the verisimilitude, I think is the word, of truth, so that people will buy it. Like, oh, okay, well, that seems true. Like, I see there are people dying of this disease, so it must be real. So fucking everyone just, I don't know if swearing's allowed on your channel. It just happened. It comes out of me. But
it's true.
Yeah, right. So the thing is, this notion of a fact checker is crap, because just because you have undermined a singular fact does not mean you have undermined truth. And this is what I'm getting back to the notion of debate and actual dialogue, where you assert your truth and you provide a whole galaxy of facts to support it. But we don't actually have that, because we don't have truth creation. We have truth subversion, right? The inversion of it, with this agenda being pushed that has just enough truth to make it passable to the mind. Like, okay, well, my critical faculties are just barely, online enough to say, okay, that sounds about right, so I'll just let it be. And so this is the real tragedy. And so these fact checkers, this idea that a fact checker has anything relevant to say at all, and this is not a dialogue either. Like, a fact checker says this is false, and then there's no forum to fact check the fact checkers under that. It's like, well, my response to the fact checker is that you're full of shit and you're leaving this out. And that's what's incredibly frustrating. And so thankfully, I think men like us are recognizing that there's almost nothing good that's coming one way through screens anymore. I shouldn't say that. I mean, we know, what I mean, though, that if
through the official programming channels, and that's exactly what they are. They're programming. I mean, that's why I talk about reprogram your mind, because we've been programmed already. Every single one of us was programmed, except they're in control of the programming until we take control of it. And then we should be programming ourselves. It's, there's a reason that if I reach my hand out like that, you do the same thing and we shake hands. Good programming. It's great. It
works.
Yeah, it says, hey, we are on the same social wavelength. We understand how to communicate. There's a reason that we speak with a certain syntax. We're programmed to communicate that way.
Right.
The problem is when someone else is in control of every aspect of our programming, and we don't get to decide what we're allowed to believe and what we're not. Many people are stuck in that position. One of the real strengths of you could say the manosphere, or however you want to describe it, is that there's a lot of men out there teaching other men how to not be manipulated. I noticed in the manosphere, there's not a lot of this is moral right, this is moral wrong. It's not church. You're not going to church. What we're going to do is teach you how to not be manipulated. And I find that most men who cannot be manipulated, that is, becomes truthful men, honest men, they end up at roughly the same place. We all end up pretty close to the same set of core beliefs, to the same set of ideas, because we all are seeing reality, and reality narrows down your options. And so we end up in the same place. And this is very, very powerful. And this is why there's so much effort to undermine the manosphere, to make, you never see a positive news article in the mainstream press about the manosphere or anyone in the manosphere. No one comes along and says, Noah Ravoy is a good guy. Every article about me, it's some way horrible description. And so ridiculous that people who know me can't understand how that article and me have any connection, except they used my name in it. And this is just because they understand that what we're doing threatens their ability to manipulate people, and their ability to essentially, when they can control people, they can harness our power. So a manipulated man can still be incredibly productive, basically acting as a slave or a thrall. I like to use the word thrall, acting as a thrall to the system. And that's really where most of us are stuck right now. We're thralls, or we're escaped thralls. We've escaped the plantation. And what they're really afraid is that all these escaped thralls are going to meet in the woods somewhere and decide to create our own civilization. And that's what the manosphere represents, where we've escaped the plantation, we've got together in the woods, and we're going, how are we going to make our own civilization? And we're currently in the stage of like trying to figure that out and argue about it. But I'm seeing the initial seeds of the actual civilization beginning. And they're afraid because we will outcompete them.
Oh, sure.
Those who are aligned with reality and natural law will always outcompete those who aren't, provided that they themselves do not get, they don't get shamed out of following the natural law. The reason they've been able to control us is because they manipulated us. Take away the manipulation, we become free men. Now we become truly dangerous to society.
And the reason why I pair that with the Renaissance of men is to create this notion that this is something that already has historical momentum. There's some, because we talked about earlier at the very start, you're responsible for everything in your life, and yes, that is absolutely true. But I tend to think about things in terms of position, trajectory, and momentum, right? So up until the first 12 to 18 or so years of your life, depending on your circumstance, you don't have a whole lot of agency. And that's by design. You're not necessarily supposed to, or you're not certainly not capable of having it in this world, because the world is so much more complex than it was hundreds or even thousands of years ago. So the number of skills necessary that aren't intuitive, needed to survive, take a longer time to develop. So you're sent out of your childhood, whatever your circumstances are, with a certain amount of with trajectory and momentum in a particular direction. And if you freeze that moment in time, all you see is you can see your trajectory roughly based on what direction you're pointing and your position. Momentum is something that's felt over time that can't be perceived in a freeze frame. So the idea of the Renaissance of men is, this is something that here's our position. We can look around and say the position is roughly the manosphere. The trajectory is something that we all feel, but we actually have 40 years of momentum behind us. And that may not necessarily be obvious to look around. And so this is my, what I like to think is my exciting contribution to it. It's like, no, this isn't something like we all just woke up one day. It's like, oh, we all need to start doing this. Like, no, maybe we can't individually feel it in our own lives, but certainly the momentum of the men who came before us, who started the wave, the mythopoetic guys for the most part, and Warren Farrell and some others, they started the wave that we're now riding the leading edge of. And there's something so much more powerful for that, at least for me as I think about it, that I can, in a way, not in a sense of being lazy, but rest back into the wave that's pushing me forward. How did I get caught up in all this? I got no idea. But what I do know is that these ideas of restoring masculinity, of renewing masculinity, were already in my environment when I came aware of at a certain time. somewhere in my 20s. Those ideas had been injected into the environment by the work of the men that had come before me. And we're injecting these ideas even further. And so that's the mimetic momentum that's taking place. And now as that mimetic momentum is changing our minds, it's changing our hearts, it's changing what we do with our bodies. And when we change what we do with our bodies, we instantiate this mimetic transformation into the world. And this is where the empire of nothing, or where culture has no power. They have institutional power. They can deplatform, they can take away your, and this is not to say these things aren't significant, because they're very significant. They can take away your bank account, they can take away your platform, they can make it difficult to transact and do business. But as soon as you step outside of the realm of institutional power, they have nothing. They have nothing. What is Karen going to do? Is Karen going to stop you from doing push-ups in your living room? What's the male version of a Karen? Is it Todd or something like that? What's Todd going to do?
There's still a Karen. We still call them Karens.
We still call them Karens. Okay. Yeah. Todd, if you're watching, I'm sorry. But what are they going to do? They have no physical power. In fact, we're reclaiming all the physical power. And so it's like, what are you going to do? Come and do something about it. I'm here. I'm doing push-ups. Oh, exercise makes people right wing. I was like, all right, well, I'm just going to be over here doing pull-ups, becoming right wing. Come and stop me. And that's
what they don't understand too, is that, we're in an effeminate society, but we're facing a bifurcation. The men who go towards masculinity are becoming extremely masculine. And that, and who is going to be the fathers of the next generation? The effeminate girly men, or us, the masculine men? It's going to be us, because women are disgusted by the other men. And we're going to end up getting the best quality women. We're going to have the best quality children. And the sons we're raising, my son's 7. So when he turned 7, I had a serious talk with him. And I said, you are now 7. Now you're mine. You can't run off to mom anymore. At 7 years old, I showed him the movie 300, and I said, look, I'm not going to hit you like that, because I'm a peaceful parent. But I said, you're now 7. And I said, you're out. You don't belong to mom anymore. You belong to me. Now, it just so happened we also had twins about that time, twin boys. So, my wife was pretty busy. She wouldn't have had time for him anyway. But I was like, no, now you're mine. You're going to do stuff with me. You're going to learn with me. You're going to work out with me. You're going to learn to fight, and you're going to do all the things that are going to prepare you to be a man. I take him out to the park. I teach him how to cold approach people. One day, if he wants to meet a girl in the park, today we're at the park. There's this good-looking girl doing exercise. He walks up to her, just starts talking to her randomly at the park. And he has absolutely no fear to talk to anybody. Okay. He has, he has a pretty rational mind. He understands the COVID hoax without me explaining it. We go to the park. He sees the police tape around the exercise equipment. He looks around, no cops, takes it all down. He says to me, "Can't let them win." He says, "We can't let them win." He's unafraid. He wants to go around and explain to everyone that they don't need to be afraid of COVID. And I have to help him now filter when he should let his power levels out, because he's so far ahead of the other kids that it's the only kids that he's around that he's not that far ahead of is when we hang out with Eastern European kids, because they grew up under communism. So their parents grew up under communism. They're the pushback generation from that. Mm-hmm. So their parents, Russian boys are not coddled by their mothers the way that Western boys are. That's why he loves hanging around with them. Yeah.
No one in Russia is coddled by anything. Coddling is not anywhere.
Even the women, they look good, but they're tough too. They're tougher than your average Western man. Yeah. That's why Western guys are like, oh, I can't get a woman. I'm gonna go to Russia and find a woman. It's like, they're gonna eat you alive.
Right. Yeah. Well, and something about Eastern European and Russian women, they have this mystical thing going on too. It's very strange. I've met many of them, and they have this strange psychic wiring. Some of them do, and you can pick up on it very subtly, the frequencies. And it's, I don't really, and Western men, even the most masculine ones, some of them are too hyper rational to kind of pick up on that. And so if you're not attuned in that way as well, oh man, get ready for that. But just about your son, the thing is, thank you, by the way, for what you're doing, because the programming, we all get programmed. That's part of growing up. It's like, the first many years of our lives are programming the brain computer for us to go in life. Thank you for the way you're programming your son. I'm over here. Thank you for programming your son in that way, because that stuff doesn't get undone. It doesn't, you can't undo it. You give him until the age of 13, you keep raising him up that way. And it's like, there is probably, as far as I know, nothing in life that's gonna, I don't know that you can insert the feminist mind virus, after that point and have it really take root. So thank you for doing that, because that's what this is all about. This is what I think it's all about. I think it's all about training up the next generation in the stuff that we didn't get as men. We've rediscovered it, we've reclaimed it, we've built it into our lives. We get some amount of time on earth to really enjoy it. But how can we, and how can I and you and the men listening pass it on to the next generation to continue this momentum and accelerate it? How can we plant trees that we'll never sit in the shade in? And that's the really exciting thing. And may we all live long enough to see the fruits of those labors.
Absolutely. We have mirror neurons. And when we have a strong masculine father that we can bond with, we actually internalize his voice. And, my son, he says to me, I did this when he was young and he was going through teething, and he would be crying about the teething. And I would say to him, take deep breaths, listen to my voice, count, and, help him to learn to deal with the pain with as little medication as possible. Because it's not actually that good to dope them up when they have tooth issues. They should learn to deal with it a bit. And now he says when I see him, he'll get stressed or he'll hurt himself and he'll go like this, start to count down from 10. And I say to him, what's going on inside your head? And he says, I hear you counting down to 10. So he actually hears me doing the countdown. So he's internalized my voice. And over generations, that internalized masculine voice, this is what gave rise to the idea of gods. It's that combined internalized masculine voice from all of our father ancestors going back. And we'd also hear it from our mother as well. Mm-hmm. And this is part of what gave rise to that idea. It is a kind of way that humans can achieve an immortality is through their children, but only if you raise your children right, if you have that strong bond with them, and if you positively help them to internalize your ideas. And you're right, it makes them immune to that kind of feminist mind virus. They become immune to it because they have their own internal psychological immune system. Powerful stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We were talking at the start of the conversation about the sword and the stone, of claiming that sense of agency. And I think a lot of men, a lot of fathers in particular, I'm speculating because I'm not a father, but I think a lot of fathers are actually quite scared of claiming that sense of agency when it comes to certainly their sons, probably their daughters as well, probably just parenthood in general, and say, am I right to pass these values? Am I right to impose these values? Because I think, at least in my knowledge of the psychological literature, there's, at least in the West, this idea that you have to let children run free and express their creativity, and you shouldn't impose your values on them, because then Christianity and bad and patriarchy and all that, and you just let children's minds create, and you shouldn't impose too much yourself on them. And of course, we see the product of that, everyone's miserable. So, but to actually claim the agency in yourself, which I'd like to honor you for saying, no, I'm going to pass these values on to my son. And I've claimed them. I've worked hard, I would imagine you have, to purify yourself and understand your intentions and know that they're good and they're right and they're true. And, to subject yourself to the same rigor of saying, have I tested these ideas out before I pass them on to the next generation? And that's really, really important, because I agree that if we're programming our children thoughtlessly, dogmatically, it's like, this is true because I say it's true. It's like, well, yes and no. But if you say that this is true because I've tested it out in my own life and I see it's pragmatic and it's practical and it works, and I give it to you as a gift, and then use it until it ceases being useful for you, and then take it further, right? And I think that's the spirit of proper parenting, but we've lost a sense of that. And ideally, parents would give something that has durable value, but also, please go ahead.
Yeah, that's agency training. I mean, I do this with adults because their parents never did it with them. Yeah. They either didn't have a father, or their father had no agency, or maybe he had agency, but he didn't connect with his children because he didn't know how. Mm-hmm. And what I do is we actually do a deep dive into your mind to give you the opportunity to look at the things you believe. It's interesting because as people dive in, they're like, I never knew I believed that. They dig out beliefs from their own psyche that they actually didn't know they believe. Now, right. A man is is nervous to pass his beliefs on to his kid, it might be because he's not really sure what he believes,
Right.
or because he understands that some of the things he believes are not true.
Mm-hmm.
And so he doesn't want to lie to his son, but he also isn't quite ready to give up that untrue belief. And by learning to have agency, by studying how to have agency, and basically tearing your mind apart, taking out what's garbage and replacing it with strong foundations, you end up getting to a point where you have this massive amount of confidence that I know exactly what I believe. I know who I am. And I know that what I believe is the best way for my children to live. And therefore, I don't have any fear to pass that on to them. If we're not that confident, then we need to do some deep internal diving.
Mm-hmm. Now, can I ask you a question about that?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So how do you get men across that chasm of they come into the world believing this, they have this set of beliefs, and then for them to get where they perhaps, quote unquote, should be, there's this path that they have to walk across that, full of such great uncertainty, where once you begin deep, and I know this myself, I went through it, I was a single man. So I didn't have any responsibilities to anyone around me. So I was able to kind of get in there and be working with my mind and, rewire everything. And there was no consequences to anyone externally. I had isolated from my friends. Like, it was my own cocoon process that I went into. And I did this when I say I did it intentionally, I knew that I had to separate. I knew I had to go away from the world. Now, for men that are, instantiated in the world, that have homes and careers and all these things that they're invested in, that are invested in them, how do you get them across that chasm where it's like you will have to challenge some very fundamental beliefs about reality and somehow rebuild the airplane in flight? How do you do that with men?
Well, and it's a great question. And I will say one of the big challenges is if you ever watched the movie Inception.
Of course.
Okay, so when you go into the mind, there's these defenses there.
Mm-hmm.
So you have natural defenses, which are healthy and good, like I'm building in my son. But all your bad ideas, they have a bunch of defenses as well. Otherwise, you would have got rid of them a long time ago on your own.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a matter also of overcoming those defenses.
Mm-hmm.
And what I do is I essentially used a system where we establish a beachhead inside your mind. So somewhere that we can know for sure that we're operating in truth. And that's your frontier. And from there, you're going to take places one by one. This is why it works best with men, is because we already have this martial mentality. Most men do, whether they know it or not. And that's why men love games that have to do with strategy and warfare and things like that. So we start taking one place by the other, one at a time, and we start working our way across the frontier. And it really can be a battle. Now, if I say you have to cross this huge chasm, that really, and it's the right word to use, it is, but that's scary. If you haven't done it before, it's scary. Right. So instead I tell you, okay, just for a little bit, you're going to surrender to the process. Mm-hmm. I want you to do X. I want you to dig into this part of your brain and pull everything out. And I give them a process which they can go through, Socratic questions which they ask themselves to pull out that information and write it down. And I literally don't want you to think about it. It's just stream of conscious, get it all down. Mm-hmm. Now we're going to process it. Now, if I told them the whole process ahead of time, they'd start the self-edit to protect those bad ideas early on.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and this is why I don't just sell the book. You have to take the course, because if you don't go through it in the correct process, you will either make it less effective by jumping ahead, or it's like renovating a house. I occasionally have clients that want to renovate their house by first knocking all the walls out. The problem is there's nothing holding your roof up anymore. So you might have ideas that are 80% true and 20% a lie, but those ideas are keeping you alive. Mm-hmm. And you need to leave them in there and deal with the worst part first. That's why we establish a little beachhead and we start dealing with the worst parts first. Mm-hmm. And we work it out bit by bit. And all the way behind, we create a new structure behind. Mm-hmm. The fighting's on the frontier and everything behind's got to be stable. And so when you renovate a house, you knock out one wall, you fix that wall. Then you knock another wall, you fix that wall. And what I'm teaching people is that process. Mm-hmm. So, they'll resolve some of their issues in the 12 weeks that the course takes. But most importantly, they learn this process. So I have a client right now who's at the end of one cycle, but I did some of these activities with him in just regular coaching. And he said, I knew the first time I went through that I didn't have it all. I didn't get it all right. I missed some things. And he's like, I'm so glad that I'm going. At first, I thought it'd be a waste of time going back across the activities again. And he's like, now that I go across it again, I realized I missed a few things. And a few of the things that bothered me that I knew weren't true, that I believed about myself and the world, but that I couldn't completely dismiss, I now understand why I can't dismiss them. And this is why also we do it in a group. The reason is you'll have a man who's incredibly decisive, but maybe a little foolhardy, and another man who's incredibly indecisive and doesn't do anything. And they'll each talk about their problem, and they'll realize they have the same problem. Being foolhardy and being indecisive is the same problem. It's a lack of impulse control.
Okay.
You can't control the impulse to not do it. You can't control the impulse to do things. And they'll realize that at the root, almost all problems are the same problem. And so by being in a group, it helps to normalize your problem. Small groups, 4 or 5 men. It helps to normalize your problem, but it also helps you to see somebody on the other side of the chasm from you, and you have the same problem, and how can you help each other out? And I often see the crosstalk between the men is almost as useful or as useful as what myself or any other coaches that are working with me give to the men. And so there's a lot of power in that, men helping men. And really, once you learn the process of digging out your own programming and correcting it, you're going to start doing it more and more rapidly until the point where it's almost subconscious and it's just happening. And I'm trying to raise my son from the beginning to understand those principles so that he will always be subjected to negative programming. You can't escape it. And you can't help but internalize it. You know, if you have a oily rag and a white clean rag and you rub the two of them together and you separate them, you don't get 2 clean cloths. You get 2 oily cloths. So that's like us. We get into the world and something rubs off on us every time. And then we have to go home and we have to say, look, I picked up these new ideas. Maybe some of these are great. Maybe these will make my life better. And maybe some of them aren't. And I have to have a process to go through these ideas that I've just discovered and figure out what's useful and what's not. And that's basically what you came to intuitively. You described that you went on your own and did it. You came to it intuitively. But I think most men can't intuitively come to that process. They need a guide. They need someone like you, someone like me, someone that has a process to guide them through that. And that's really the value. It's just, and this is not a new thing. Men have always needed guides.
Always.
Fathers. Yeah, and it wasn't always our father. There were always wise men in every village that would help with the initiation process, and they would guide. Sometimes they would guide the father so he could guide the son. I have clients where I coach the father so that he can help his son better. You know, and that's, I think that's better than me coaching the son, because I'm actually helping 2 people in each session instead of 1.
Oh yeah.
And really helping to start a pattern there, because now with his next child, he can do the same thing. And so there is this power in following that process and in having help.
And I think this is the difference between a coach and a therapist. I think a lot of men are very hesitant to go to therapy, and I think there's a lot of reason for them to be, because I think a lot of, I talked to Dr. Sean T. Smith a few weeks ago on my podcast, and he's talking about how the profession of psychotherapy is being completely overrun by feminism, by cultural Marxist ideologies. I listened to his 21 convention talk from a couple of years ago, and he was saying that he felt that even in the clinical setting, that psychology would be okay because they still have to deal with individual people. And when I spoke to him maybe a month or 2 ago, he said he's less confident in that now. So now therapy is being overrun with feminist ideology, which is terrible. I had considered being a psychotherapist for a while. I would be starting my training around now, but now that I know that I would be just heading into a regular university is just feminist indoctrination camp, essentially, because of the APA guidelines. So, I think that there's plenty of reasons for men to avoid therapy. I think that therapy gets a bad rap for many reasons. But assuming that you can find someone that you have chemistry with that has a lot of integrity as a man and is able to guide you, I was very fortunate to find a therapist. His name is Jamie, and he helped me through some very crucial periods of my life. And he was a very strong, masculine man, which is what I needed to mirror some of those things for going into these dark places. But therapy, and it was a great blessing in my life. But therapy is very different from coaching, because when I go to a therapist is there to help me unpack my inner world and look at it, and that's all we're there to do. If we get a chance, we open it up and we discover this new thing and we look at it together, and maybe we get to throw it out, or maybe refine or do whatever, and then we pack it all back up and come back and do it again next week with no really goal except for my own inner transformation. And hopefully that will manifest in outside results, but maybe not necessarily. Maybe it's enough to just go and let's unpack this anxiety, or let's unpack this depression. It's a mostly non-directive process. Certainly there's not so much outer accountability that's built into it. You can, of course, build into it, but I don't know that it's ideal for that. With the exception of I would like to not be depressed anymore. Well, you have to do the work to, like that. But when it comes to
non-linear part is why a lot of men don't like it. Just that.
Yeah.
That structural part of why they don't like it.
Absolutely, because am I making any progress? Am I getting anywhere? It's like, well, if you keep working it, you'll see. But yeah, it's not going to proceed in the time that you think, because we're dealing with 8 years later. Yeah, I mean, for example, I was seeing my therapist every week, but I was doing work, work. I was going.
How much of that was the therapist, and how much was that you because you did the work? That's part of it. Is that people go to therapy and they're like, fix me.
Yeah.
I'm going to lay down. You fix me.
Congratulations. Let me get my wand. Bing. You are fixed. We have said the magic words. But so the difference between that and a coach is that a coach sets external deliverables of modification of behavior. And these are in some ways complementary, synergistic processes, but it's much easier with a coach to say, you know what, just try this behavior out. Just trust me. Just give it a shot and see if it produces different results. And that's why I think this explosion of coaching right now is so exciting, because men are naturally averse to therapy for all the reasons we discussed. But it's easier to go to a coach, and it should be, because a coach will say, this is the process, you follow the process and you do the things and you act as if, and you see if it works. Just go with it. Commit to it. You don't have to give up your way of life, but just try it. And then they can see, and they make measurable progress, like, oh, wow, this really, really works. And in the process, as I'm sure the stuff comes up, and then you get to confront it. But I think it's a more effective process for many men that are results, external world focused. I've always been very interested in my internal world. So it was not so difficult for me to go into therapy, let's unpack all this shit, because I'm so curious what's going on inside my own head. So different men are wired different ways, but so many men are really drawn to the coaching process and all the different processes. And I think that's a really great thing. And it's also, and the best part about it is there's no credentialing body that says you can't be a coach. There's no one's like, I can't hang up a shingle.
Thank goodness. And I will oppose anybody that tries to start one.
That's right.
Right now, if you're a therapist, and I have a lot of empathy for good therapists that are out there, and I will say I think they're a minority, but good therapists that are out there, if you tell the truth, you're risking your career. You might be able to get away with that in an individual coaching session, because if anyone asks you about it, you say, hey, client patient privilege, I can't tell you what I said in that session. Try saying it publicly. And some of the guys that are therapists that have been involved with 21 Convention, they know what that's like. People annoying over things. And if you're in an industry where telling the truth goes against the official guidelines, that industry is become corrupted. And it's so hard for these therapists to work in that kind of an industry.
Oh, it's terrible.
It's massive. And I think with us as coaches, it's actually more of closer to a business process. So if you had a business and someone said to you, look, I need to figure out why my business isn't making money. And they said, okay, lay down on this couch and tell me about your mother. you wouldn't give them any money, right? If someone comes and says, I have this problem with my business, and they're like, okay, tell me more about it. What's your goal? Okay, how about, you start going here and doing this and making these changes. And they tell you specifically what you need to do to make money. the difference is that we have a way of measuring success.
Mm-hmm.
I've had therapists tell me that I said, how do you measure success? And they said the person comes back next week.
That's terrible. That's criminal. That's criminal.
I do. I feel that way too. I actually, like you did, I thought I examined going to school to learn to be a therapist, and there are online schools so you can get away from some of the direct bullshit you have to dealing with the teachers and other students. But I actually thought it was going to make me worse at my job. After looking at the curriculum, it's going to make me worse at my job. And I couldn't do it right now because I couldn't not tell the truth. It would bother my conscience so badly that there's no way that I would pass the classes. So it is really unfortunate.
When you say tell the truth, like, help me understand what you mean. So in an individual, who's telling the truth? Like a therapist couldn't tell the truth.
Yeah. For example, if you have someone that comes to you and says, my 3-year-old son was wearing a dress, could he be a girl? And you say to him, no, this is what kids do. They also, my son thought he was a dog for a week. I didn't go and buy him a leash. It's just what kids do. They play and make believe and they pretend. Okay. Right. Now, if you're a therapist, you could say that to someone in a private session. But if you said that publicly, you'd be platformed completely. And I don't mean to platform from social media. I mean, they could take your license to be a therapist.
Got it.
And that's absolutely evil. Now, I can see if they said, okay, there are factual things wrong with what you said, and there is punishment based on that. There's real harm been committed. But in that case, it's a matter of telling the truth. And there is a whole bunch of areas, mostly around sexual dynamics, like that. Marriage therapists, marriage therapy for men is almost always a disaster.
Always adversarial to the man.
Yeah, it's a disaster. Partially because it's almost always a female therapist. Women will naturally side with other women. I don't fault them for that. I fault the guy for going to marriage therapy instead of coming to a coach or a masculine man, at least as a marriage therapist. Mm-hmm. If you side with the woman, then they're going to keep coming back until the man runs out of money. But if you side with the man, the woman will say, let's find another therapist.
Right.
So if you're a marriage therapist, you are highly pressured to side with the woman. The reality is most men who are having problems in their marriage should come on their own to coaching. And half the time they don't need to know anything about marriage. They just need to know how to be a better man. And that's literally all they need to fix their problem, because they're either going to fix their relationship or end it, but it'll be fixed.
One way or another.
One way or the other, it's going to get fixed.
Yeah. I have a friend, I've known him for about 20 years. We're not so close anymore, but he started seeing, it was an escort, but it was a non-sexual escort, as they have in San Francisco. Like you want an attractive young woman. He's a married man, 2 kids. You want an attractive young woman just to spend time with you, maybe to cuddle, make out, something like that.
You want a woman not to bitch at you for 15 minutes, basically.
Well, yeah. And so he started seeing this woman, and I guess somehow he got caught. No sex, maybe they had a little bit of oral sex. It would be the most, it was the impression of what I got from, it's certainly not serious. He got caught by his wife, and his wife was a typical, unfortunately Western woman who, had sort of let herself go and, and had her own way of treating him and all of that stuff, and sort of ceased caring for his needs. And and my buddy, he was going to go to marriage counseling with her and with his wife. And I was talking to him, and I was trying to get him to see that, I'll call him Jim. That's not his name, but Jim, understand that you did what you did, not because you're a bad person, but because you had needs that were being unmet by your wife in the relationship. That whatever you did that doesn't make it right? You still broke your integrity. You broke your accountability. There's still accountability on your end, but recognize that in your marriage, there's mutuality here, that there's room for both of you to be wrong and to begin to try and rebuild your relationship from that standpoint. And I was warning him, do not go to marriage therapy, because all you're going to hear from the therapist, man or woman, probably a woman, but all you're going to hear is men are bad, patriarchy, terrible. How could you do this to this wonderful woman? You're a terrible person, etc. And unfortunately, he lives in the Bay Area. And so he's inundated with all of these ideas, and he agreed to go to marriage therapy. And I haven't really asked how that went, but I expect the results are somewhat predictable. It's like he was very resistant to the idea that his wife could have done anything wrong, or that he had the ability to experience, like, look, you want to experience passion, sexual passion, attraction, desire, care, being given freely. You want to experience those within your own body, within yourself as a man, and you want to experience care being given back to you for who you are. Not that it's not transactional. These are very fundamental, basic human experiences that men want to feel. And so you stepped out of your marriage to go and find these things, to feel passion as a red-blooded male, because you don't feel it for your wife for obvious reasons, and you wanted to feel a woman's care coming for you. There's nothing wrong with that. And the reason why you want those things is because your wife isn't giving it to you for whatever reason. And there's her accountability on that side too. And
yes, that's a symptom. His stepping out is a symptom of a problem. Yes. And any kind of a medicine that treats symptoms and not root causes will be ineffective, and it merely prolongs your death. In this case, the death of the relationship. Right. If you look at it, okay, she was not giving him what he wanted. Then go one step farther back. Why was he not demanding why was he not setting a boundary where I don't get what I want? I don't get reciprocity in this relationship. This relationship cannot continue. It's not about I get what I want. It's reciprocity.
That's right. And go ahead. Sorry.
And reciprocity between a couple might not be the same way. There are men need, as the things you described. Women need safety and security and those things. That's more what they're interested in. Reciprocity isn't exactly one for one. Otherwise, there would be no point in trading. Right. So if I buy an apple from you, I give you $1, you give me an apple. That's reciprocity, but it's a trade of different objects. So men and women, they trade different things, but it needs to be reciprocal. And that's not a transactional relationship. That's a reciprocal relationship. And there's a big difference there. It's that each one is looking out for the interests of the other. If she stops looking out for his interests, he needs to step in before the pressure on him gets so intense that he's willing to step out. And probably, almost every couple I know that gets divorced, the seeds of that divorce were laid in the dating and the early part of the relationship before they got married.
Oh, sure.
We usually do a post-mortem, or it's already suffering, but it's not quite dead. And we'll do that post-mortem and go backwards. And I have had couples that have had really, I don't want to talk about details in case someone thinks that I'm talking about them in particular, even though a lot of these details overlap, but there will be some serious fault in their partner. And I'll be like, how did you not notice that they were whatever? Drug addict or BPD or something? They noticed it and they ignored it. And they ignored it because men today have been told that they're not allowed to set boundaries for themselves. They're not allowed to be men. They're not allowed to say, no, I need this. And if you don't give me the things that I need, we can't have a relationship together. They've basically been neutered. You asked what, I don't know the results of my friend. The results is that his nuts are sitting in a jar somewhere, probably in the therapist's office. And that's really what he's going to get as results. And, men, they need to go to other masculine men to ask for help in their marriage, not to a marriage therapist. That's really, there maybe are a few good marriage therapists out there, but they're operating on the edges of what is acceptable as a therapist. And so, find those guys that are literally like, fine, deplatform me and fire me. I don't care. I'm going to tell the truth. They're very, very few.
Well, and that is very, very true. And that these marriages that fail, or the relationships that fail, there are broken dynamics from the start is usually the case. That either the man, this is my story, so this is very personal to me, that in the relationships that I've been in the past, they haven't worked out because there were things that I was programmed to overlook. Oh, it's fine that she looks like this, or it's fine that this is going on. I'm a man, and men are terrible people, and I shouldn't have, that's a problem. Look, she's a wonderful person. She's a wonderful
person. How can we judge them on looks? Are we shallow?
Exactly. It's exactly right. Oh, I don't feel any sexual desire. Well, sexual desire in men is bad. And so I'll just set that aside for 10 fucking years of my life. No problem. You know what I mean? So this is personal to me. And it was when I was able to reclaim my own desires and say, no, wait, this is good and right and true. And it fuels and fires me as a man. I'm going to claim that back. Sorry, bye. And there was a huge hue and cry and everyone got really mad at me. And I'm like, well, you know, deal with it. Bye. I'm out, you know? So, but the thing is like, I did it. Obviously I didn't do it like that. I did it with high integrity and with care. And, you know, it was a life transition. I respected her as an individual while also staying committed to my own path and a claiming of myself. So these things, you know, there's a way of claiming one's, say, power, but also doing it in a way of integrity. And that's, you know, rather than just a hard break, for example. But with my friend, you know, I think there was that component that was true, but there was also this real reluctance in his part to hold his wife accountable. Like for him to say, you know what, I'm not attracted to you anymore. You know why I'm not attracted to you anymore? Because you put on 80 pounds. And so now, like, that's not attractive to me. So I want to feel desire for you. I can't, because genuine desire can't be negotiated, and it's not okay. And you, and because you're carrying around all this added weight on your body, for example, you're probably really stressed out and upset. I used to be overweight as well, and I was miserable, and no one can tell me healthy at any size, because I was overweight and it sucked. Every day I had this suppressed, you know, tension in myself, because I know this is not the right way of carrying my body. So someone who can't even be there to care for their own body won't be there to be able to care for their partner. So you're not showing care to me because you're not caring for yourself. And so, yeah, I went somewhere else to go find, and you know what? He did it in the most high integrity way possible. If you're going to do something like that, you know, he's like, you know what? I'm going to pay for it, which is going to be bounded. It's not going to bleed over. Maybe this wasn't his thought process, but still, if you pay for someone for an hour of their time, they're not going to be calling you up at random days. They're not going to go psycho and show up at the kid's school. He's not having sex. He's just going to get a little bit of something that he wasn't getting at home. And I couldn't get him to see that for whatever faults he may have overlooked in his wife in their, say, 18 years of marriage, he couldn't get himself to be courageous enough to see that maybe she has some accountability in this too. Maybe it's not all about the man, which is what the unfortunate part of our culture says. It is all men's fault. And I get really upset about this, because there's a lot of blaming that's happening in the culture that tends to blame guys that look a lot like me and you. It's the straight white man's fault, right? That's the thing. That's the thing, right? It's okay to hate. And you
know why? Because we're the only ones they see as having any possibility of developing agency.
Interesting.
That's really what it is. It's an incredible racist and misogynistic concept. We're the only ones that can possibly have agency. Therefore, we're the only ones that can be responsible for anything.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, exactly. Like so,
it's essentially what he was doing was failing to assign any agency to his wife at all.
Yes.
She can't possibly behave. The same reason why, you know, he committed those crimes because he was raised in an underprivileged community and because of racism, blah, blah, blah. It's like, that guy can't have any agency. He can't possibly be responsible for his behavior because he's a child, you know? Right. And this is incredibly, and us pointing it out, they'll call that racism and sexism, misogyny.
Well, you know, I'm not saying anything about the individuals, whether they do, or I believe that every man and woman can have agency. Yes. But to say that a group doesn't have agency and shouldn't be treated as if they have agency, that's the real racism. And yes, like you say, to say that is like, what's like the inversion? The inversion skills are incredible. And you were talking about the rags, you know, the oily rag and the clean rag, and when you touch them together, you get two dirty rags. And these mind virus ideas are out there. And the reason why these mind virus ideas are out there, and the reason why they're so potent, is just like salt, sugar, and fat, and social media. All of these things have been targeted, specifically designed to prey on the weakest parts of our mind. Like this social justice ideology is designed, we all carry around as part of being human beings. Christianity has one explanation for where it came from. We all carry around guilt and shame. It's just part of living. For whatever reason, as human beings, we just carry around guilt and shame. It's part of existence. No one can be totally purged of it for whatever reason. In Christianity, I happen to be a Christian, ascribes it to this notion of original sin, right? So we can leave the theological debates aside, but that's where they attribute where it comes from. And social justice ideology thrives on this backdoor hack into our limbic brain of this guilt and shame. It's like you feel guilty and you feel ashamed because you're an oppressor. And so, oh, is that why I feel this? Because I'm privileged. Oh yeah, well look around at all this information you're showing me on TV about how terrible the world is, and I'm privileged. That's why I feel this shame. And it gets its hook in us. It gets its hook in this weak spot in our psyche. And it just takes over the mind because there's no resources available to counteract it, in the same way that if you eat a sugary snack or you start scrolling on Facebook or whatever, there's no outside force, that's going to come and intercept that and be like, whoa, 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 except for fathers, as it turns out. And so that's the function, is to intercept, to come sliding in right there and be like, what? I caught that. And you institute boundaries and discipline, which is the masculine function. And because we live in this boundaryless society is why everyone allows pornography, particularly men, but everyone, pornography, video games, cigarettes, alcohol, all these heavily addictive things to take over our beings until we're just these fat, lazy, psychological wrecks. And so it really requires the masculine function to come in and institute boundaries. And that's why the pushback is so strong. You can ascribe it to all different layers. I can go all the way up to the spiritual layer. You can give it to, there's a financial component. It operates on all these layers simultaneously. But that's why the holistic and integrated masculine is so necessary to stop this on all the layers of its being.
Yeah, it's important what you mentioned about the different layers. This is not a one-front war. This is a multi-front war that we're facing.
Even inside myself.
Yeah, my Twitter handle, the way I describe it is I'm an arms dealer for the soul. So I'm arming you up so that because when I say the soul, if you look at the original description, it doesn't, in the original Hebrew in the Bible, soul doesn't refer to some external spirit that can leave you. It's everything. It's your mind, your body, your heart, your soul, your spirit. It's everything. Together is your soul. So you talk about a living soul.
Oh, sure.
So I'm arming you basically on all fronts. I'm helping you get armed up on all fronts so that you can fight on every one of these fronts in the war. And it is really an unprecedented time in history. Originally, human beings, the first thing we fought was ourselves. We fought our own. You got to fight your own desire not to get out of bed in the morning. Now, I don't really have that anymore because I really like what I'm doing. But if you were a primitive person living in primitive times and life was tough, you might feel pretty crappy, beat up in the morning after a hard day's hunt. You might not feel like going out and, chasing down a gigantic rhinoceros or some other huge animal and trying to kill it. So we had to fight ourselves. Then we have to fight nature. So we have to go out into nature and capture the resources that we need. And then, we get enough people around, we're going to have to end up fighting some other people too. So we had to fight other people. That was a different front in the war. And we've actually those fights never end, but we've also added on to it spiritual battles and psychological battles. COVID is psychological warfare against the population.
Oh, yeah.
It's psychological warfare between what I call the evil elites and the rest of the population. They're trying to wear us down. My son, he came to me and he said, Dad, he says, this is really stressful not being able to go to the park. He said, like some parks we can't go to because they're locked up. And he said, you know what? I think the government is trying to lock everybody up until they go crazy and kill themselves. This is what he said. And I said, you're way too, you're really smart and you're seeing way too much for a 7-year-old without me showing him. He intuits these things because he doesn't have that programming to keep him blind. The blinders are not on. He's never been to public school. He doesn't watch television, and I'm his main source of programming. So he's programmed to see, not to be blind. And this is, we can learn to win at every stage of this war. We can learn to win in every part of it. We have cryptocurrencies as ways to win on the financial war side. We have, you could learn to escape their programming to win on the psychological side. And bit by, we gather together, we protect ourselves and protect each other. We'll win at every single level. But it is a complex war. And it's not something that we're going to be able to fight alone. It's not something we're going to be able to fight without a process and a method to go through it. And it's not something we're going to fight if we want to recreate everything from scratch. We have to learn from the older men that have gone through these things like you and I, and we learn from others as well. So, we're passing on that wisdom. And that's an important thing. We're passing that wisdom on as a chain to the future. And we're really at a point now where I think all the things that people like you and me have developed are now going to accelerate. We're now starting to get this out to the public, to accelerate it. Can you imagine if young men, 18, 19-year-old men, are learning to develop their agency? They'll never go through most of the problems that you described earlier with relationships that people are going through, because they won't have that programming that prevents them from facing the truth that other people have to have agency and that they have needs, and those needs need to be fulfilled as well. This is my hope for the near future. And, young men and young women as well that want to escape this programming, that want to be to win on this battle for the future of humanity, contact Will Spencer, contact me, learn how you can get help. We're here to help people. I don't know if you coach women, but, I coach women as well. So, okay, good. Yeah. So women also can contact Will. His links are in the description below this video. Thank you very much for joining us today, Will, and for everyone who's watching.
Thank you very much, Noah. This was great. I appreciate you inviting me on.
You're welcome. Have a good evening.
Have a day.
Thank you for watching our video, and I hope it inspired you to take action in your life. Please subscribe to our channel and like this video to get more agency building content. The real secret sauce is in our newsletter. Click on the link in the video description below to sign up. I promise I won't flood your inbox, and anything that we do send you will be of high value.